So I'll just, okay, recording is started. So once again, please make sure to mute yourself if you are not speaking. And I will introduce our next speakers for this section that we kind of loosely called the Green New England Deal. It's going to have a couple pieces. One is just going to be talking about the stakes for New Hampshire and Vermont and our whole region if we don't pass some significant policies around achieving a just transition in our states and in our region. And the second piece of this section is going to be focused on why we each need a massive vision for ourselves right now, which is kind of the reason we're together today. So the first person who's going to be speaking is John Erickson. John is the Blittersdorf Professor of Sustainability Science and Policy at the Rubenstein School of Environment and Natural Resources and is a fellow of the Gund Institute for Environment at the University of Vermont. He has published widely on climate change policy, renewable energy economics, environmental management, the theory and practice of ecological economics, and has led international research and education programs as a Fulbright Scholar in Tanzania and as a visiting professor in the Dominican Republic, Iceland, and Slovakia. He has also produced an Emmy Award-winning documentary, or multiple documentaries on water, energy, and food systems transitions. Founded and led numerous nonprofit organizations, including the U.S. Society for Ecological Economics, Adirondack Research Consortium, Deportes para la Vida, and Bright Blue Ecomedia. I'm really thrilled to have Dr. Erickson, Professor Erickson here today. Before I even moved to Vermont, I was paying attention to the work of ecological economists and felt it was extremely important for the world. And then happened to move to one of the places where it is deeply rooted in our university system. So thanks so much, John, for joining us. And I'll turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you for inviting me. So I've got 10 minutes to set the stage here. The purpose of this short session with Kathy and me is to set the stage for some visioning that we're going to do. And my job is to start with some historical context, reminding us that we've been here before and that anything, and I mean anything, good or bad, is possible going forward. I'm going to be using the chat feature of Zoom to ask you some questions. So if that's not open on the right-hand side of your window, maybe you can go ahead and do that. Just click the chat icon at the bottom of the main window and you'll have that open. And I'm going to be asking a couple of times just to ask you to respond to a few quick questions to keep things moving. So we're hearing a lot of discussion in this time of crisis about how we need to get back to normal. But I hope that part of this afternoon is to ask if normal of just this past January is what we really want. Do we want to get back to the status quo? And from the discussion so far, it seems like the answer is no. That the discussion so far are reminding ourselves that normal was already in crisis, right? We have a climate crisis. We have an extinction crisis. We have a crisis of growing inequality. We have a crisis of persistent racism and a crisis of decades and decades of stagnating wages. I've been working in the area of climate change policy and economics since grad school. So that's now going on 30 years ago. And since the James Hansen testimony in Congress in 1988, over half of all industrial CO2 pollution ever admitted has been put into the atmosphere. So let that sink in for just a second. The same amount of industrial CO2 emitted in the last 30 plus years was emitted in the previous 240 years since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution. So this problem of climate change has been accelerating, to say the least. So when I look back at past crises in recent history, we see that you know, crisis always, whether you like it or not, brings opportunity. And the question is, whose crisis and whose opportunity? So let's think back to the Great Depression and the New Deal coalition that arose from the 1930s crisis. So in your chat box, when I say the words New Deal, let's play a word association. What does it bring to mind? New Deal. What does New Deal bring to mind? Jobs, freedom from fear, health, equity, National Recovery Act, public works, compassion, social security, government jobs, racism, green jobs, social safety nets, CCC, infrastructure, failure to secure public child care, worker protections, Tennessee Valley. Wow, this is fantastic. Public works, failures, trust in government. Okay, good start, good start. So this was a political, keep them coming if you want, but I'm gonna keep going. This was a political agenda, right? That lifted many out of poverty and many out of the unemployment lines, but also left a lot of people behind. The New Deal was a multi-year agenda born out of the crisis of the Great Depression. FDR's full cabinet was actually sworn in together just hours after his March 4th, 1933 inauguration, already more than 2 years into the Great Depression. Within the first 100 days of the new administration, 15 major bills were passed and 99 executive orders were signed. And the philosophical shift was very clear from the beginning. The Secretary of Labor at the time, Frances Perkins, the very first woman cabinet member in the US, and called the moral conscience of the Roosevelt administration, she advocated right away for a 40-hour work week, minimum wage, unemployment compensation, abolition of child labor, Social Security, federal employment service, and universal health insurance. And Roosevelt, as you all know, took nearly wartime powers through regulating prices, issuing debt, and broadly stimulating the economy. It did a lot of things. It lifted a lot of people out of poverty, also left a lot of people behind. So now fast forward to the 1960s and the Great Society agenda. Word game again. What do you associate with the Great Society? When I say those two words, 1960s, LBJ, Kennedy into the Johnson administration. When I say Great Society, what comes to mind? Not so great. Vietnam, war on poverty, social movements, white people, boomers, Vista, Civil Rights Act, Medicare, Medicaid, keep on coming, racism, Vietnam, there's been a few Vietnams, US hegemony, Peace Corps, the draft, activism. Okay, so let me keep the ideas coming, but I'm gonna keep on moving. You know, as the economic turmoil of the 1930s created this mandate for FDR, really the political turmoil of the 1960s created a mandate for Lyndon Johnson. The assassination of John F. Kennedy on November 22nd, 1963, actually created a political mandate for change that hadn't been seen really since the New Deal years. Lyndon Johnson capitalized on this. He signed long-stalled civil rights legislations into law, and less than a year later, on July 2nd, 1964, the momentum continued into his first term when he was elected as president. And Johnson, much like Roosevelt, got to work. He submitted 87 bills to the 89th Congress and signed all but 3 of those into law in his first 9 months. So I try to remember, like, when crisis happens, how much of a response there can be. Response that sometimes we agree with, sometimes the response we disagree with. This political agenda set into motion sweeping economic, social, and environmental movements that we still recognize today in much of the mainstream movement politics. But as with the New Deal, many promises were left unfilled, and many progressive changes were ultimately either overturned or underfunded. So the 1970s, right, brings inflation, recessions, oil crises, and the election of Nixon in 1968. That set the table for what we now call the neoliberal turn. So my last question to you all, when I say neoliberalism, what's the image? What's the words? What's the What's the thing that comes to mind when I say neoliberalism? So failure again, messaging, shout out to Lewis Powell, Bill Clinton, hegemony, democratic establishment, triangulation, privatizing the social agenda, Reagan, corporate politics, elitism, hippies with haircuts, misinformation, privatization, privilege. Good. So keep them coming. I'm just going to wrap up here because I do only have 10 minutes. So many point to the Heritage Foundation's mandate for leadership as the blueprint for the neoliberal term and the turn. It was released in January 1981, the same month of Reagan's inauguration, and included more than 2,000 recommendations in what United Press International at the time called, quote, a blueprint for grabbing the government by its frayed New Deal lapels and shaking out 48 years of liberal policy. This is what became known as the Manifesto for the Reagan Revolution, was circulated at its very first cabinet meeting, and an estimated 60% of the 2,000 suggestions were implemented or initiated by the end of Reagan's first year, not first term, first year in office. So the ideological shift in America of neoliberalism was purposeful, it was profound, it was composed of what the National Committee for Responsible Philanthropy has called an overtly ideological agenda based on industrial and environmental deregulation, the privatization of government services, deep reductions in federal anti-poverty spending, and the transfer of authority and responsibility for social welfare from the national government to the charitable sector and state and local government. So the thing to keep in mind, and I'm only doing 3 of these sort of moments in recent history, right, is that there are many other crises and political agendas that would arise. From the left, the International Sustainable Development Agenda that really rose as a counter to neoliberalism coming out of the Global South's debt crisis of the 1980s. From the right, the next wave of an American-led militarism coming out of 9/11. And most recently, the Occupy Wall Street movement and the 1% narrative that arose from the most unequal economic recovery in history following the Great Recession. But to a large extent, we are still living on the long, long road of the neoliberal turn. Each of these moments didn't arise from nowhere or only because a new president was elected. Each, from the left, from the right, arose out of years and years of organizing around common goals and common vision. Each was a product of its own time, its own crisis, and its own shift in power. And each represented this value shift in society that we just explored in our first breakout sessions. So the big question, I think, for us, and to tee up for Kathy, is what will be the elements of a new vision, a new power base for 2020 and beyond? What does a decade of the Green New Deal look like? What would it look like, to use AOC's charge to us all? Thank you very much.
Thanks so much, John. Really appreciate that. Thanks everybody for the great conversation in the chat as well. Very happy to see how engaged everybody is. And now I am really happy to introduce Kathy Albiza to you. We are running a little bit ahead, and I just tried to get confirmation that Kathy's ready to go, but I'm not sure that she is. But I will go ahead and introduce her. And if she's just not quite ready to go, then okay, she's ready to go. All right, so Kathy Albiza is the founding director of Partner for Dignity and Rights, formerly known as the National Economic and Social Rights Initiative. She has 30 years of social justice experience, ranging from supporting grassroots campaigns, such as the Healthcare is a Human Right campaign in Vermont, to litigation, to lobbying and international advocacy. She claims that she has been privileged to grow into the role of a movement strategist thanks to working with groups like RAD and learning from frontline organizers. She has particular expertise in economic and social rights, including housing, education, low-wage workers' rights, and healthcare. She has worked in gender, economic, and racial justice organizations and is committed to a human rights approach centered on local work with a global vision towards national change. Thanks so much, Kathy, for being here. Kathy is a huge inspiration to me, and it's just an enormous privilege to have her here today. So Kathy, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, am I on? Do you see me? Okay. So I am not, now that I heard my introduction, not by you, but before that, I am talking about what some of the elements might be. I'm not entirely sure I understood my assignment and now regret not having sent you the talking points ahead of time. But what I'm going to do, especially since we have a few extra minutes, is maybe merge two different PowerPoints. The first one I prepared on sort of why visioning is so important. Like, what is the actual function of what we are doing here?
That is definitely what
I was supposed to do? Oh, good. Then I don't have to like squeeze in something else as well. So I'm not going to get into the specific elements because I think that's what you all are figuring out. I might touch on some examples, but it's really the why. And people who know me know that I've been generally obsessed with the why since I was, the why of everything, since I was a kid. I was one of those really annoying why kids. And I feel like life is now paying me back and I have to try to answer a very big why question myself. So I am going to share my screen. See if I get this right. And tell me if you, please confirm for me if you see the, is everyone seeing the, there, it is working. All right. Now with my massive technological expertise, I have to figure out how to actually get back to my, whoops. So the equation that I feel like I'm supposed to be answering here is vision plus future equals what? And so here are some possible answers. You will always win. You can change the future. You will decimate the opposition, which is always great. None of the above. I would actually argue it is none of the above. And it is none of the above because a vision alone, right? A vision alone, no matter how powerful, might as well be a hallucination. So I just want to start by clarifying that vision is a piece of what we do, but there are no shortcuts. After we build our vision, we still have to organize. We still need campaigns. We still need to develop policies. We still need narrative strategies. We still need leadership development. We still need to elect champions. So it is important to understand what a vision is for. A vision is a blueprint for how we do all those things. It is not a substitute for doing any of those things. At the same time, if you're looking for transformative change, you will not get it without a vision. And why is that? This has been echoed before, because people can only go somewhere that they've already been in their minds. If they can't imagine it, they can't reach it. Especially if you're working towards transformation. The abolitionists and freedom fighters had to imagine freedom. The suffragettes had to imagine equality. Workers had to imagine solidarity and power when they built unions. It is a precondition, it prefigures getting to transformative change. That should be reason enough, but I'm going to share another 5 reasons that strategically and practically, we must build a clear, coherent, big vision. So the first one, change happens no matter what. I think that was already referenced before. The world changes with or without us. Tech is changing, climate's changing, COVID's changing the world. You don't get to decide whether change happens. What you get to influence is how we change. Change you cannot avoid. And in terms of changes towards justice, we never know when they happen, but we know they don't happen by chance. There is a lot that goes, a lot of preparation, years of work and social movement building that allows for change to happen in that moment of opportunity, even though we don't know exactly when it's going to be. It is a product of what ideas have taken root and what work has been done to move those ideas. The arc of history bending towards justice is not a law of physics, right? It is a result of a lot of work and a product of how we prepare. And building a vision is foundational to influencing that moment of change. But envisioning a different future is also a defensive strategy, believe it or not. It is a strategy to fight fascism. And why is that? You might ask yourself, being here, thinking about the future, big vision, that feels really far away from being on the front line of the resistance. But this is how fascists see time. People who know much more than I have sort of surveyed and studied this. And this is the fascist conception of time. It is an endless loop of usually violent conflict between an us, in Trump's case, people who are white and Christian, and them, people who are not. Time is a loop, and there is no different future. And in fact, there's no past. It's an ahistorical, fake past that the fascists talk about. So they love to say things like, make America great again. They love words like again, because that means there's no future. We just keep looping back. It's just a never endless battle, and the only outcome is either a clear winner or clear loser. This is their vision of time. And when you talk about the future, when you reclaim the future, you actually break the psychic hold of the fascist narrative. So it is inherently anti-fascist work, especially when we talk about the future not only going in a direction, but a direction we can influence and control. The third reason, and I think what most people think about why we need a vision, is we need a North Star. There are so many policy options to address particular problems that if you don't have a vision, you don't have the clarity to know that, for example, if you want to move towards a community-controlled and democratic economy, it's community-controlled green energy. It's not corporate subsidies that are the solution to your problem. Everyone here on this call, I think, knows that, but that's because you already share a vision and you're just here to deepen and strengthen it. And strengthening that vision gives us there's yet a fourth reason why we need to strengthen that vision. The power to define reality, right? The right actually defines reality for us. There are different forms of power, and the power to define reality is central to how society is organized. It is one of the most important. The right has created a social reality where Black people are always criminals, where although we throw away 40% of our food, we can't afford to feed everyone. A social reality where our economy is tanking unless we constantly produce and sell more and more. A social reality where there are more empty homes than homeless people, but homelessness is somehow unsolvable. They have gained the power to define reality through a clear and coherent, racist and profit-centered vision that they constructed decades ago. We are living in the future they imagined. That is what is happening to us right now. A future of weak government shaped by corporations, not people, and racialized capitalism that keeps us divided. And envisioning our future differently is how we build power to take reality back. We need the power to define reality, and our reality needs to be grounded in this vision for a Green New Deal, one unlike the first New Deal that will not be racialized if we are to succeed. In some ways, right, that was a great step forward, but in other ways, we need to address the fault lines it created. It was a racialized New Deal, and it was a profit-driven, not people-centered New Deal. It meant to grow the economy. That is how it decided to solve the problem of white poverty. And that leads me to a very critical fifth reason. It unifies us for the long game. We know when we have vision, when we have a clear, deep, coherent, powerful vision, what we're all fighting for and running towards. We know we're all working towards that same thing. And our work here is not to sprint. That's why I have that little relay thing going in my picture. We know this cannot be a temporary arrangement where you just come together for 1 or 2 short-term wins. And we know our work is even beyond the metaphor of a marathon. It is a generational relay race. And we have to hang together, passing it on to the next generation and the next and the next. The only way we convey that and succeed in creating the kind of sustained unity that we need is with that very clear and deep vision. And you know what? Our vision today, what we're building today, is the only thing that will make those generations even possible. Fundamentally, that is why we need this vision. We need to make future generations possible. The laws of nature do not care about our petty politics and our social problems. They are indifferent to the fact that we are coming to terms only now with the reality that we may be on the brink of extinction due to our own choices and inaction. Only our vision here today is how we can change that, how we can understand how deep our seriousness of purpose must be, how much depends on what generations today decide to do. And we can only come together to face something that big with what we've just been echoing and echoing, a clear, powerful, effective, coherent, workable, unifying vision. And then organize like our existence depends on it, because it does. Thank you very much. That's my little 10 minutes. Probably like 8, but.
Thanks so much, Kathy.